Hello, I am William Stuart, author of The Invisible College, The Great European Secret, which describes the foundation of grubby banking in the world and the European Union, as well as explaining who caused many of our wars, such as the American War of Independence, French Revolution, the American Civil War, and also the Russian Revolution. I suppose you think these things happened by themselves. They didn't. The wolf pack, the same bankers, created all our wars. Then there's the Invisible College Demons of the Third Reich. It's the second book, which explains how World War I and World War II were created using Freemasonry, the industrial military complex, and all organised by the same bankers. It explains how Hitler was recruited as a child, and by whom. Then there is the Invisible College 9/11 to Armageddon, which explains who created 9/11 and why they did so, also discussing the plans for World War III. So what I'm going to talk about today is global warming, man-made global warming, and how this is connected to the same bankers who cause our wars and who have caused so much havoc in the world, as they seek a monopoly control of our banking, our currency, our food, our energy, and our trade, also incidentally removing our sovereignty. These are the GM-modified crop brigade. Anything unpleasant, they did it. Now I tend to go to the root of things, so you have to think deeply and hang on and let the plot develop for you, because you see the same people are involved in the global warming nonsense. This green nonsense has cost the taxpayer huge sums of money. That's you and me. Our money spent by the mud pie brigade at Westminster. They don't know what they're doing. They ought to know, but many of them have not had enough experience of life. So we see them going to Westminster to make mud pies from the Thames mud, while the quality of the country and the standard of life and living goes on declining because they are not in control. First of all, the bankers use the Club of Rome for their green man-made global warming scams. This is part of the Council of Foreign Relations, which tries to run America, Bilderberg, which tries to run Europe, and the Trilateral Commission that tries to run the rest of the world. This all links into Chatham House, Royal Institute of International Affairs, London, and across into the ERT, European Round Table. Now there are many accusations of data fixing concerning green energy, but you'll have read some of the work of reporter Christopher Booker in recent times. What he does not do, of course, is go to the source of the hoax. Instead of that, he goes to the reasons why global warming should be considered to be a hoax, scientifically speaking. So we're going to go to the roots of all this, and we're going to look at it as a fraud. Under the heading Global Warming is a Hoax, a new report came out by the space agency NASA, and it's headed like this: NASA study proves carbon dioxide cools the atmosphere. The recent NASA report throws the space agency into conflict with its climatologists after new NASA measurements prove that carbon dioxide acts as a coolant in the Earth's atmosphere. NASA's Langley Research Center has collated data proving that greenhouse gases actually block up to 95% of harmful solar rays from reaching our planet, thus reducing the heating impact of the sun. The data was collected by soundings of the atmosphere using broadband emission radiometry, or SABRE. SABRE monitors infrared emissions from the Earth's upper atmosphere, in particular from carbon dioxide, CO2, and nitric oxide, NO. Two substances thought to be playing a key role in the energy balance of air above our planet's surface. NASA's Langley Research Center instruments show that the thermosphere not only receives a whopping 26 billion kilowatt-hours of energy from the sun during a recent burst of solar activity, but that in the upper atmospheric carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide molecules sent as much as 95% of that radiation straight back into outer space. The shock revelation starkly contradicts the core proposition of the so-called greenhouse gas theory, which claims that more CO2 means more warming for our planet. However, this compelling new NASA data disproves the notion and is a huge embarrassment for NASA's chief climatologist, Dr. James Hansen, and his team over at NASA's GISS. Already the International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, which of course is the dog baying from the United Nations, has been in full retreat after having to concede a 17-year stall in global warming despite levels of atmospheric CO2 rising almost 40% in recent decades. The new SABRE data now forms part of a real-world double whammy against climatologist computer models that have always been programmed to show CO2 as a warming gas. As NASA's SABRE team at Langley admits, this is a new frontier in the Sun-Earth connection. Carbon dioxide and nitric oxide are natural thermostats, explains James Russell of Hampton University, SABRE's principal investigator. When the upper atmosphere or thermosphere heats up, these molecules try as hard as they can to shed the heat back into space. To those independent scientists and engineers at Principia Scientific International, this is not news. The natural thermostat effect of CO2 has been known by applied scientists and engineers for years. Some die-hard climate alarmists will say that in the lower atmosphere the action of carbon dioxide is reversed, but there is no actual proof of this at all. PSI suggests it is time for the SABRE team to have a word with James Hansen. You can see the NASA video on YouTube. So the real scientific community is chasing global warming liars right now. NASA and IPCC have had to adjust their spectacles. And so has the BBC, which betrayed us all, which became obsessed with climate change. The reason for this? Well, what about all those free grants and money that's been slewing around for those who will betray their fellow human beings? And there's another bit to this rat pack. That's members of the British Met Office. Global warming stopped 16 years ago, the Met Office report reveals. So who are the deniers of the truth now? This is an article by David Rose, published 13th of January 2013. Last year, the Mail on Sunday reported a stunning fact. The Met Office's own monthly figures showed there had been no increase in world temperature since 1997. There's precious little before that. One green website in the US said our Mail report was utter bilge that had to be exposed and attacked. The Met Office issued a press release claiming the Mail report was misleading, before quietly admitting a few days later that it was true, that the world had not significantly warmed since 1977 after all. Then the rest of the media caught up with our report. News finally broke of a revised Met Office decadal forecast, which not only acknowledges the pause but predicts it will continue, at least until 2017. Quite where they're getting their data from on 2017 is unknown. Probably it'll be as unreliable as all the rest of it. It says world temperatures are likely to stay around 0.43 degrees above the long-term average, as by then they will have done for 20 years. This is hugely significant. It amounts to admission that earlier forecasts, which have dictated years of government policy and will cost tens of billions of pounds, were wrong. They did not, the Met Office now accepts, take sufficient account of natural variability, the effects of phenomena such as ocean temperature cycles, which are counteracting greenhouse gas warming, but of course it doesn't warm anyway. Surely the Met Office would trumpet this important news, you would think, as it has done when publishing warnings of imminent temperature rises. No, there was no fanfare. Instead, it issued the revised forecast on the research section on its website on Christmas Eve. The Guardian nor the Independent bothered to report this startling fact in their paper editions. One of the curious features of green journalism is that if it gets unusually cold, this will be dismissed as mere weather of no significance, while a heatwave or violent storm will be seized on as a warning that catastrophic climate change is already here. Well, you can relax, because you've just been dealing with liars and hoaxes and a lot of rather ignorant followers. There is no man-made global warming. It doesn't exist. Back in 2007, when the Labour government was preparing what became the Climate Change Act, far from being neutral, the Met Office and its Christmas Eve activities made a blatant attempt to influence political debate. In a glossy brochure, it revealed it had a new system that could predict the future by combining analysis of natural variability with long-term trends. Well, where are they now? It boasted that this showed how the Met Office used world-class science to underpin policy. No doubt some of the MPs who voted for the Act with its hugely expensive targets to replace fossil fuels with renewables such as wind were swayed by it. Barely 5 years later, it is clear this forecast was just completely worthless. The Department of Energy and Climate Change hopes offshore wind farms can provide up to 15% of electricity needed by 2020. You see what a mess they're in. And there's another heading which I'd like to read to you, the crazy climate change obsession that's made the Met Office a menace. The 200 million a year official weather forecaster often gets it wrong. This week it has admitted there is no evidence that global warming is happening. The Met Office quietly readjusted its temperature projections on its website on Christmas Eve. Was there ever a government quango quite so useless as the Met Office? Without fanfare, apparently in the desperate hope no one would notice, it has finally conceded what other scientists have known for ages. There is no evidence that global warming is happening at all. According to David Whitehouse of the independent think tank, the Global Warming Policy Foundation, the climb down couldn't be more dramatic or more devastating for the Met Office's credibility. They're panicking, he says. All the predictions they've been making about man-made global warming these past 20 years have started to come crashing about their ears. For 2 decades, the Met Office has acted as Britain's foremost cheerleader for climate change alarmists. In 2007, its Hadley Centre for Climate Change Research produced a briefing document for the government claiming its state-of-the-art computer models left no doubt man-made global warming was a very real threat which needed to be addressed urgently by policymakers. The Met Office Hadley Centre has the highest concentration of outstanding people who do outstanding work, spanning the breadth of modelling, attribution and data analysis of anywhere in the world, claimed an expert from the IPCC. So much for the IPCC and the UN with it. The 2008 Climate Change Act was passed by an overwhelming majority in the government. The Act has been described by veteran journalist Christopher Booker as the most expensive legislation in history, committing the government to as much as $734 billion, that's $18.3 billion a year for the next 40 years, in extra spending to decarbonise the economy. Just think of these figures. Aren't we in enough trouble now because of this government, or the Labour government mainly, and followed on by weak Conservatives? Aren't we in enough trouble already? 18.3 billion a year for the next 40 years is just being wasted, our taxpayers' money being thrown out of the window by the mud pie makers. It is also one of the reasons why our countryside is being ruined by ugly, noisy wind turbines. The Met Office will be attacked for being not just risibly incompetent, but an active menace both to the integrity of science and to the nation's well-being. The Met Office spokesman stated, "Never mind that global warming stopped in 1997. It will come back with a vengeance one day. We're just not quite sure when." Oh, goodness me. Then there are all kinds of spurious claims that have been made. There's evidence to say we are getting slightly more rain in total, but more importantly, it may be falling in more intense bursts, which can increase the risk of flooding. But these claims appear to be at best a dangerous fudge, at worst complete nonsense, as it is clear from the Met Office's own data. The England and Wales precipitation records dating back to 1766. There's been nothing particularly abnormal about the recent rains. Not only were the 2 years 1872 and 1768 wetter than the supposed record-breaking year of 2012, but also the Met Office appears to have overlooked 2 very dry years, 2003 and 2011, to prove its narrative that the past 10 years have produced abnormal changes. The Global Warming Policy Foundation, Dr. David Whitehouse, believes the very notion of extreme weather is unscientific nonsense. If you were to pick up any period in history, you would soon find an example of an unusual weather event, maybe a heat wave in Russia or fires in Australia. Having started this big lie, then of course attached to it is everything that goes wrong, to prove the point, and it's all an illusion. Somewhere in the world, a weather record is being broken almost every single day. This is quite normal. What's not normal is when people try to impose on it some kind of invented trend. Never mind the mere 200 million we pay a year to fund the Met Office's dodgy, mystic Meg prognostications. The real bill for its incompetence runs into billions. We have questions to ask, but Westminster, apparently making mud pies, has nothing much to say. But they should be explaining to us who paid for all these high-level infiltrations of our country, who did it, and why was the government vulnerable to bankers' lies? Don't ask an MP if they're going to turn around and do anything about this, because they're still trying to capture carbon for us. Soon it turns out that one of the gurus of Agenda 21 and all that nonsense was a friend of the Chinese, who make a lot of black smoke at our expense. Maurice Strong, a Canadian oil billionaire, was also the Secretary-General of the 1992 United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro, where the unveiling of Agenda 21 occurred. He said current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class, involving high meat intake, use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and work, air conditioning, and suburban housing, are not sustainable. These are people that fly around in private jets, incidentally. The tantalizing tale of missing Kofi Annan point man Maurice Strong is no longer one of those puzzling, unsolved mysteries. Canadian Chairman Mo, a big gun in the international arena, dropped right off the radar screen in April of 2005, when his alleged ties to the UN oil for food scandal cropped up and wouldn't go away. According to investigations carried out by the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, Mo's location has been pinpointed, and it never required a Miss Marple to track him down. AWOL Maurice Strong is alive and kicking in Beijing. Canada Free Press, whose two favourite people to track are Mo and his sidekick Gorbachev, always knew that Mo would return to China, his favourite place on Mother Earth, where they make all the black smoke. What we didn't know, but read with relish in the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, is that smooth-talking architect of the Kyoto Protocol has no choice but to remain in the Orient. Maurice must now remain in China, where he is very welcome, to avoid questioning by the FBI and Canadian investigators about the £1 million that he gave to his son to hide in their nuclear power company, which is now bankrupt. Pointing out that Strong is very welcome in China is a polite way of saying that he's right at home, where overpaid environmentalist spin doctors have long claimed that Maurice Strong was the only man alive who could see that the United States of America is replaced by communist China as a world superpower. That's where Mo's sidekick Gorbachev, who was never really ever out, comes in. Gorbachev is living in San Francisco, where in 1993 he had a 3-star general present him with the keys of his new digs. Canada Free Press founding editor Judy McLeod is an award-winning journalist with 30 years' experience in the print media. Her work has appeared in Newsmax.com, Drudge Report, Fox News, Glenback and The Rant. So there's an interesting fact to consider. One of the leaders of the whole movement is cowering in Beijing currently. Now let's concern ourselves with these extraordinary people and their New Times Atlas. Tamara Cohen wrote an article called New Times Atlas Must Be Popped Over Climate Change Exaggeration Row. The latest edition of the world's most prestigious atlas should be pulped because it exaggerated climate change, scientists said yesterday. The £150 Times Comprehensive Atlas of the World has changed a large coastal area of Greenland from white to green, suggesting an extreme acceleration of the melting of the northern ice cap. After a group of eminent Cambridge scientists wrote a letter condemning the change, the publishers admitted that they had overestimated the extent of the ice loss in publicity material accompanying the launch of the new atlas. But they defended the accuracy of the map. The scientists accused them of making basic GCSE errors. Dr. Ian Willis of Cambridge University's Scott Polar Research Institute said they utterly disputed that the Greenland map was correct and highlighted a list of blunders. Then we have been treated to the East Anglia hoax as recorded on many documents. Do you remember those emails? University of East Anglia, Phil Jones. He wrote in his email, I've just completed Mike's trick of adding in the real temperatures to each series for the last 20 years from 1981 onwards to hide the decline in temperatures. Keith Briffer, same university. Submitting to demands for freedom of information undermines the scientific expectation of personal confidentiality. I believe none of us should submit to these requests requiring freedom of information. Kevin Trenberth, 12th of October 2009. The fact is we can't account for the lack of warming at the moment, and it is a travesty that we cannot. Do you remember those emails? It's possible just to skip over these things and not put them together as we should. But you've had an atlas that was blatantly altered and sent round the schools. You've got dodgy emails in the universities. As I said before, has not Westminster even managed to ask who has infiltrated, how widely, who funded this, and what do they want? No, they've done nothing except make mud pies. This private musing between two climate scientist colleagues first surfaced along with a whole raft of embarrassing material in 2011. It's embarrassing for them, that is, when the anonymous ClimateGate leader, who calls himself Mr. Foyer, leaked his second set of emails from Britain's disgraced climate change unit at the University of East Anglia. Mr. Foyer had previously released 2 batches of 5,000 files, each in 2009 and 2011. The enormous third batch went to a network of friends for decoding, sorting and publication. The first and second email batches contained conversations among scientists who appear to have dishonoured a once respectable discipline, documenting that their claims of a man-made global warming crisis looks exactly like a deliberate contrivance for academic career gain, research funding and positions of political power in the cause. Now you have to ask, who has the money, the influence to saturate Great Britain with an infestation such as this? Well, let's begin to look at this. First of all, the European Union was formed in 1942 in the middle of World War II. Hitler was about to fail in his mission to take over Britain and America, and was at the stage of controlling Europe without anyone at all retaining their sovereignty or their currency. So the bankers met in secret in Canada, see in the Great European Secret, and planned the European Union. The bankers created World War II, so this Canadian venture was not a simple extension of Nazism, but of bankers' synergy. Synergy, created in America by Carnegie, called Marburg there, is a peasant commune run by bankers and not governments. That is why the bankers control so many governments today. It's a stepping stone to synergy, member of empire, SME. In Britain, I think they call it common purpose, the slow infiltration of the establishment, the people reduced to left-wing peasants in a commune run by right-wing bankers. This is the purpose of Council of Foreign Relations Bilderberg, represented in Canada at the secret meeting by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands and by Jesse Rettinger. So if you think the Bilderberg meetings are innocent, think again. As part of the EU process, the CIA had to be infiltrated by the bankers, and Operation Mockingbird was mounted to destroy a free press in America. CIA sent Agent Crozier to Britain, and using the fear of Russian communism created filter groups to protect against it, which filtered out a free press in Britain. Mrs. Thatcher fell for the ruse, and Crozier had free rein over our intelligence services, which were, of course, linked back to America, to David Rockefeller, and not to the White House. They went in for phone tapping that spread also to American-owned newspapers. Britain had 200 years of coal in the ground and fabulous mining communities, also a rail network and many heavy industries dependent on coal. Crozier systematically undermined the Students' Union, peace movements and the coal unions, guarding against so-called communism. The MIs, our intelligence, hacked into phone calls, as you will find in Stella Remington's biography. Out of the destruction of the peace movement came the industrial military, obtaining agreement for a defensive shield of rockets across Europe, even though the Cold War itself was planned by American bankers and their Round Table Chatham House counterparts in the European Round Table. Now this group of financial hooligans rewrite our history, and we may call them the Round Table. They're represented in Britain by the Chatham House Fabian Society, London School of Economics, All Souls Rhodes Scholarships, Tavistock Mine Manipulations and more. The EU is also Round Table, ERT, and that will be known to you. At the base of all this is Swiss banking from Geneva, founded originally in 697 AD in Venice. Mont Pelerin Society, a secret society for the EU. On the pretext of aiding Britain, it found place in number 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister's residence, where it advised Mrs. Thatcher on economics and went about asset stripping everything we had. So now we're in the middle of a horrible conspiracy. The bankers who caused 6 modern wars and want to have a 7th now control the politics and the money of the European Union. That is why it's not a democracy. They suffocated the press, see that in 9/11 to Armageddon, hobbled our intelligence and undermined our economy. Mont Pelerin in number 10 asset-stripped our industries, putting forward corrupt CEOs of industry and handing our success stories like Rolls-Royce and Land Rover to foreign European masters. Beeching sorted out our rail network, but more was needed to flatline our economy. Deregulation was howled for by current Conservative ministers and the strange New Labour Fabians, all under one control. And for a while a few people made money and drank champagne, including the slobbering dogs of the stock exchange. Greed, that is still our main problem, as we are now vulnerable and easy prey to fat, immoral bankers and their global lusts. Once we had morality. Not anymore. The Green hoax was run by two Club of Rome participants, David Rockefeller and Al Gore. So we find that the campaign against the trades unions and miners came from the same source. So you see things begin to add up. The Green movement was run by Rockefeller. So were the wars. So was the creation of the European Union and the meeting in 1942. It's all one thing. The attack on the trades unions was planned with great care. Let's just consider, and this is Crozier and pushing Mrs. Thatcher, let's just consider who was behind this. The extreme right wing in America, Rockefeller Chase Manhattan Bank, called then Chase National Bank, started the persecution of the Jews in Germany before the Nazis did. Rockefeller trained Trotsky for the Russian Revolution, just as he trained Rudin, Hitler's advisor, at Cold Harbor from 1910 in the art of eugenics, then used against the Jews and ill Germans. He opened the Kaiser Wilhelm Eugenics Center in Germany. Rockefeller was in a contract with Farben and Bilder that made the gas that killed the Jews in concentration camps. And he employed before and after World War II the man who organized the melting down of the Jews' gold teeth and gold possessions. He supplied the Nazis with fuel all the way through World War II. Rockefeller worked closely with J.P. Morgan, the Warburgs, Rothschilds, Kung Loeb, now joined, I believe, by Goldman Sachs and the American International Company. They organized Crozier, who fooled Mrs. Thatcher, Prime Minister, she being advised by bent intelligence called Shield and Circle. The CIA was to relate to all these organizations, and President Roosevelt and Truman considered Standard Oil and Rockefeller to be traitors to America. Now the idea was to break up the British economy completely, and to do this with a scientific fraud. This was created by the Club of Rome, another branch of the bankers, which contained, of course, Rockefeller and Al Gore. Remember the Al Gore gaffe. As CO2 increases, he said, so does the temperature, but CO2 follows the temperature changes. Getting rid of coal, our energy source. Well, let's be clear, Mrs. Thatcher loved Britain, of that there goes no doubt, but her administration would be surely seen as a chapter in our country's decline. The UK miners' strike was a major industrial action affecting the British coal industry. It was a defining moment in British industrial relations, and its defeat significantly weakened the British trade union movement. It was also seen as a major political victory for Margaret Thatcher and the Conservatives. The political power of the National Union of Mine Workers was broken permanently. 10 deaths resulted from events around the strike. 6 picketers, 3 teenagers searching for coal, a taxi driver taking a non-striking mine. A strike very nearly occurred in 1981 when the government had a similar plan to close 23 pits, but the threat of a strike was then enough to force the government to back down. It was widely believed that a confrontation had been averted only for the short term, and the Yorkshire miners passed a resolution that a strike should take place if any pit was threatened with closure for reason other than exhaustion or geological difficulties. In fact, the principal reason for the government's decision to avert a strike at that time was because coal stocks were low, and a strike would have been very serious and had an effect quickly. On the 6th of March 1984, the National Coal Board announced that the agreement reached after the 1974 strike had become obsolete, and that in order to rationalise government's subsidisation of industry they intended to close 20 coal mines with a loss of 20,000 jobs. Many communities in the north of England, as well as Scotland and Wales, would lose their primary source of employment. It was not widely known at the time that the Thatcher government had prepared after a repeat of the effective 1974 industrial action by stockpiling coal, converting some power stations to burn petroleum, and recruiting fleets of road hauliers to transport coal in case sympathetic railmen went on strike in support of the miners. The Labour MPs for Doncaster North and Castleford and Pontefract both raised concerns in Parliament over suggestions that the police were asking miners held in custody about their political allegiances. Dame Stella Rimington, MI5, 1992 to 1996, published an autobiography in 2001 in which she revealed MI5 counter-subversion exercised against the National Union of Miners and the striking miners, which included the tapping of union leaders' phone calls. And of course this is the Crozier introduction. He was employed by the CIA. The coal industry was finally privatised in December 1994 to create a firm called RJB Mining. Between the end of the strike and privatisation, pit closures continued with a particularly intense group of closures in the early 1990s. There were 15 former British coal deep mines left in production at the time of privatisation. However, by March 2005, there were only 8 major deep mines left. Since then, the last pit in Northumberland, Ellington Colliery, at Ellington, has closed, whilst pits at Rossington and Harworth have been mothballed. In 1983, Britain had 174 working mines. By 2009, this number had decreased to 6. In the early 1970s, the Institute for the Study of Conflict played a significant role in politicising industrial conflict in England, using Crozier, who used Thatcher. In cooperation with the Confederation of British Industry (CBI), it launched a campaign designed to establish that industrial conflict rested on subversion. It helped to get important segments of the press to blame left-wing militants for labour unrest. Subsequently, it was found from ISC's own correspondence that ISC was being funded by the CBI and its member firms, that its study, Source of Conflict in British Industry, was written in part by writers from other institutes closely affiliated with industry, and that much of its evidence came from the files of well-known and discredited right-wing organisations, whose materials only took on respectability when laundered through the ISC. So there you have it. The ISC is CIA-linked and is responsible for exaggerating a left-wing presence inside the miners' unions. Nottinghamshire miners had hoped that their pits were safe, but they too were mostly closed in the 1985 to 1994 period. This was widely resented as a betrayal of the promise that had been made to working miners in the strike. They had been told that their jobs were safe and their industry had a future. The closure of pits also affected engineering, railways, electricity and steel production, which were all interlinked with the coal industry. Unemployment tragically reached as high as 50% in some villages over the following decade. Let me just mention, in the Executive Intelligence Review, there is a suggestion of one of the most tightly knit mafia, in the sense of a closed Masonic-like fraternity of families, pursuing common aims operating in the West, rather than use the powers of the state to achieve their geopolitical goals. A secret cross-linked holding of private financial interests tied to the old aristocratic oligarchy of Western Europe was developed. It was in many ways modelled on the 17th century British and Dutch East India companies, but it wasn't just modelled, as its agents often tended to be defrocked priests whose family names could be found in 697 AD, founding the first and very corrupt central bank of St. George's in Venice. Now, it's just worth remembering that when we're talking about scientific fraud, which the Lombards, Italian bankers, have always loved, you begin to look back at an actual and real force which is still active in our world. And if you really want to know what was behind Crozier and the CIA at that time, well, look no further than the Executive Intelligence Review. But it was all heavily disguised as pure politics, not revealing American CIA as a source, and never, of course, showing the British Round Table involvement in what was, after all, a European central operation to wreck the British economy. In 1965, Crozier was appointed chairman of a London-based CIA propaganda operation called Forum World Features. The CIA propaganda operation was overseen by Kermit Roosevelt, the CIA agent who had organised the overthrow of the democratic government of Iran in 1953 using the Trilateral Commissioner's Mr. Ball. This was in the era where John and Alan Dulles, Councillor of Foreign Relations at Bilderberg, steered through the Suez crisis and caused potential financial disaster for Britain, making Britain withdraw from the Suez Canal and issues east of Suez. Now I'd like to just look at what I've already mentioned, that these bankers come from the Club of Rome and have used that organisation in the Green Movement. So let's look at what the Club of Rome is. It's a conspiratorial body belonging to the hidden bankers who created the UN, World Bank, Federal Reserve System of Geneva, or Bank of International Settlements of Basel, who are behind the Global Roundtable movement. This group was organised in 1968 for the purpose of accelerating the plans to have the New World Order in place by the year 2000. The Club of Rome developed a plan to divide the world into 10 regions or kingdoms. We are talking of food, fuel, medicine, banking and trade monopolies. Not some world movement for its own sake, but galloping greed urged on by these psychotic oligarchs. In 1976, the United States Association of the Club of Rome was formed for the purpose of shutting down the US economy, and of course the British economy too. The Club of Rome is a conspiratorial umbrella organising a marriage between Anglo-American financiers and the old black nobility families of Europe, particularly the so-called nobility of London, Venice and Genoa. Well, there you have it again. The key to the successful control of the world is their ability to create and manage savage economic recessions and eventual depressions. Make no mistake, says an article, the Davos elite enjoys the global depression and love corporate welfare. They greatly profit from government subsidised green ventures which drive up energy costs and line the pockets of compadre companies under the control of the financial barons. The Davos crew, it goes on, of corporatist gangsters fly into their feast on private jets. The sycophant media reporting by the business toadies that attend the gala celebrations of global autocracy should be indisputable evidence that the globalists own the public relations spin. Quite agree with that. The monopolists' plan for adding unwarranted tolls on your family budget, sold as a noble necessity, will only accelerate the systematic impoverishment of your economic existence. CO2 is a harmless gas of great importance to plant growth. It's also a cooling agent, but it exists in minute quantities in the atmosphere and could harm no one. It does not come from a human source in any quantity, and humans have little effect on the weather, in fact none at all. Most CO2 is from rotting leaves and undersea volcanoes in any case, or it is emitted from the sea when it goes through natural temperature rises, which started perhaps hundreds of years before. The point is, global warming always takes place before an increase in CO2. So the maniac Al Gore got it all the wrong way round. CO2 is a cooling gas and is therefore a natural part of the Earth balances to keep climate change to a minimum. Now try to take in what some of these so-called politicians, the mud pie people, MP, mud pie, what they've done to us. Here's a heading: families face 17 billion bill after Miliband offshore wind farm blunders. Botched schemes will cost the UK taxpayer billions, say Commons committee. Generous deals for firms are shocking, says Labour MP. 6 licences awarded to just 2 firms. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology produced the original computer figures for global warming, quite corrupted, suggesting global warming, but it doesn't exist. A fake atlas showing glacial meltdown has been produced for the schools throughout Britain, and so school education has been interfered with. The United Nations IPCC has interfered with the working of local councils in Agenda 21, with teenage young in TT30 trained abroad to make a commotion, and some of their programmes suggesting the closure of coal-fired power stations. They have been over-generously financed. Part of the Club of Rome agenda is to make the British economy fall apart, as a Lombard banker, headed by Monet and J.P. Morgan, invested in China and India in the 1930s. It's not often known that just we had a so-called European Union, a Syndicate member of Empire, The so-called EU created by Monet, well, so was the Chinese Revolution. The Conservatives have largely accepted the programme from Labour, with its Labour Fabian agenda, but even the Conservatives cannot let go. Can you imagine trying to capture carbon, which they're currently trying to do, which makes our plants grow better, which is hugely derived, not from human beings, but from undersea volcanoes? How are you going to catch that? Well, answer the question, Mr. Miliband and Mr. Cameron. Answer the question, because you're spending our money. The Conservatives have largely accepted the programme that has been handed down to them. That is true. The Club of Rome started through its key member, Alexander King. And he was to write, in search for a new enemy to unite us. We came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behaviour that they can be overcome. Right? So they invented it. They just invented the idea. Well, they said so, they wrote so. The article from King continues, the real enemy then is humanity itself. Club of Rome exists to limit the size of the world's population. The Club of Rome was established in 1968 by somebody called Aurelio Pecci, or Pacey, and Alexander King, along with other scientists and industrialists. The story is told in The Great European Secret. The first Club of Rome's global planning contract went to Massachusetts Institute of Technology. At the invitation of the Swiss government, the Club of Rome defined a methodology to ask J. Forrester and Dennis Meadows to create a mathematical model which could be applied to complex situations such as world economy, the environment, and the urban growth. The Club of Rome drew up a list of 1,000 variables to be included in the equation, focusing on 5 main topics: investment, population, pollution, natural resources, and food. Bilderberg in Holland did much of the organising, peddling the Earth Charter and pagan goddess Gaia, although they favoured goddess Astarte in the past. Vast money resources have underpinned projects that conclude global warming as genuine, and some big names have been involved. Some of those speaking out against this fraud, like David Bellamy, have been marginalised. They established a new global model that distinguished 10 world regions and involved 200,000 equations integrating social as well as technical data. They used the MIT for these nonsense figures. In 2005, the House of Lords Committee for Man-Made Global Warming formed, and a major figure was Lord Lawson, who as Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1980 was the first politician to comment on global warming. Lord Lawson stated, "We had a thorough inquiry from a whole lot of expert people. What surprised me was how weak and uncertain the science was. There are more and more thoughtful people, some a bit frightened to come out in the open, but who say privately, and some say publicly, hang on, this doesn't add up." Now, this is not so for our gallant mud pie experts. The trading floor price for carbon credits will start at £16 per tonne in 2013 and hit £30 per tonne by 2021. George Osborne, Chancellor of the Exchequer, March 2011. Oh. The Geneva-based World Consortium behind this nonsense wrote this: the fastest growing industry globally is continuing on an upward trajectory. Global financial institutions such as the World Bank and IMF project the size of the carbon economy to reach over 2,000 billions per annum by 2020. But that is your money and mine, taxpayers, and any money we contribute will be stolen. But why invest in the carbon market? Asked David Cameron. The answer is not straightforward, but one thing we do know for certain: the majority of people and governments accept climate change is real and that something must be done. David Cameron's policy strategy centred on green issues. Margaret Beckham. You know Margaret Beckham? Achieving climate security has to be at the core of foreign policy. We now know there is a way to make money out of everyone's climate convictions and the actions they want to take to cut emissions. They had the world bankers behind them, but slowly the world, sane establishments, had come to its senses. Someone has managed to stop the BBC lying about man-made global warming. Quite a feature, as they became obsessed with the Rockefeller and Club of Rome plans. Peter Clark, a paleoclimatologist and co-author of Science paper. When you combine data from sites around the world, you can average out those regional abnormalities and get a clear sense of the Earth's global temperature history. What that history shows, the researchers say, is that during the last 5,000 years, the Earth on average cooled about 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit, until the last 100 years when it warmed about 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit. In other words, it returned to its norm. No, the world isn't getting warmer, as you probably noticed. Now you receive the official data that makes scientists suddenly change their mind about climate change. Doom. So will eco-funded MPs stop waging a green crusade with your money? No. Well, what do you think? The Mail on Sunday today presents irrefutable evidence that official predictions of global climate warming have been catastrophically flawed. The graph on the page shown blows apart the scientific basis for Britain reshaping its entire economy and spending billions in taxes and subsidies in order to cut emissions of greenhouse gases. These moves have already added £100 a year to household bills. And here's what the experts now say. Global surface temperatures have not risen in 15 years. They make the high estimates unlikely. Piers Forster, climate change professor at Leeds University. This changes everything. Global warming should no longer be the main determinant of economic or energy policies. Dr. David Whitehouse, Global Warming Policy Foundation. Climate models are running too hot currently. Flat trend may continue for 2 more decades. Professor Judith Curry, Georgia Institute of Technology. Avowed climate skeptics are more unequivocal. Dr. David Whitehouse, author of a new report on the pause, published on Friday by Lord Lawson's Global Policy Foundation, said this changes everything. It means we have much longer to work things out. Global warming should no longer be the main determinant of everyone's economic or energy policy. And a quote from David Bellamy: "I said the end wasn't nigh, and it cost me my BBC career," says TV's first environmentalist David Bellamy. So BBC's got quite a lot to answer for, apart from fooling people. There is a correlation between temperature and CO2, but some of my colleagues have put the cart before the horse. The evidence shows CO2 levels follow temperature, not the other way around. Indeed, there may be many factors that determine our climate. Australian scientist David Archibald has shown a remarkable correlation between the sun's activity and our climate over the past 300 years. But the scientists behind the theory have a vested interest. It's a great way to justify new taxes, getting more money, and guarantee themselves more work. The reality is that man-made global warming is a myth. The global temperature is well within life's limits, and indeed the present day is cooler by comparison to much of Earth's history. That comes from the Climate Lab book. The implications, while Westminster makes mud pies, the public are fleeced by their incompetence, which goes right to the top, as you have seen. Families face £17 billion bill after Miliband offshore wind farm blunders. Botched scheme will cost UK taxpayer billions, says Commons Committee. Now we turn and look a little bit at these wind turbines. That's quite important, isn't it? Because for some reason they've tended to concentrate a little bit on these instead of on generating power from water, from waves, from rivers and so forth, tides. Wind turbines are actually less efficient than claimed. Wind turbines are 25% less efficient than the renewable energy industry will claim, according to research. "47 wind farms were examined, and the machinery, the turbines, were running at 22.07% efficiency. The website on Renewable UK Energy, which represents 650 wind and marine companies, states that over a year a turbine will generate about 30% of the theoretical maximum output. This is not a snapshot of wind energy output. It is a robust appraisal over a significant period of time, said Stuart Young, who was commissioned to investigate wind power by GMT. It doesn't matter how many wind farms you build. If the wind isn't blowing, the blades aren't turning. And then came another one. Wind turbines only lasting for half as long as previously thought. A study shows they show signs of wearing out after just 12 years. A study of almost 3,000 turbines in Britain sheds doubt on manufacturers' claims that they generate clean energy for up to 25 years. The research will fuel criticism of wind farms. And so it goes on, arrows on and on. For offshore wind, examined only in Denmark, where it has been used for longer, these blades and turbines declined even more dramatically. They were efficient to up to 40% at the start, but fell to 15% after just 10 years. The cost of renewables is unsustainable, horribly expensive, and takes money from the poor and pensioners and gives it to the rich landowners. It has already decimated mining communities. I mean, what a utter mess. And the more the mud pie experts, MPs, go on fooling the British people and stealing our tax money, the worse the situation gets. And it is very bad. So, Brussels and the UN make companies that emit CO2 pay a carbon tax. This adds £73 to the family household bill. It drives away such industries that are taxed like this from our country, but has no effect upon carbon emissions, which just simply occur somewhere else. Not only are the companies still existing, but in the same area of the world, but in any case CO2 comes from volcanoes, etc., not from mankind in significant quantities. Then there's the emission trading scheme. It was such a failure that the government voted in a carbon price floor which keeps electricity more expensive. It is just a revenue or hidden subsidy. It costs the household £105. Add that to your 75 or 73. In the closure of coal-fired power stations, the EU, UN, large combustion plant directives, 20% of UK generation of cheap energy will be lost as Britain is required to close its its very effective and efficient coal power stations. A further financial catastrophe is close by. I just can't estimate the cost to Britain and to households as they bat off our coal industry and coal-fired stations. In any case, you know, when coal is filtered properly in chimneys, I mean, it leaves clean discharge. But then you know the lies that have been told. Then there's the 2008 Climate Change Act, costing $18 billion a year for 40 years. This is our tax money. It means nothing, as CO2 is a swindle by a Club of Rome acting for the wider globalists. Storing carbon. What on earth is that about? It does good to plants and is not an agent warming anything. Then there's the CRC, or Carbon Reduction Commitment Energy Efficiency Scheme, where some 5,000 organisations using 6,000 megawatts of electricity will be fined £12 per tonne of CO2 produced, so a university or airport may pay £1 million more for energy. It's all getting complex. Putting up costs and technical consultants will be needed when the process creeps towards smaller property owners. And it'll come because these people are thieves and they're rogues. Government feed in tariffs. Households generate more electricity than they need. Government feed in tariffs. And they've been guaranteed 25-year payments, but the other less well-off households will end up subsidising the system. It's going to cost £70 per household. So as well as a rise in bills of £248 per household, there is trouble coming because of the loss of coal and then coal power stations. $18 billion for 40 years because of the added Climate Change Act. And the CO2 doesn't even exist as a dangerous substance. And the inefficient wind turbines and general stupidity of all mud pie governments. Let's get it straight. Strong countries have been raided for their sovereignty and independence. Countries renowned for standing against oligarchies like America and Britain have been asset stripped. As part of the process and further down the line, the globalist bankers have started stealing our money and putting up prices, with the government approving, and further distorting the energy markets with a view to its own gains also. It's not an exaggeration, it's exactly what's happened. New Labour and present Labour are as guilty as any. The inability of the present government to do anything sensible with the mess reminds one of the old oligarchies run by nasty finance, and far more than it does of a living, vibrant democracy. The wrong decisions are being made all of the time. I don't know about you, but I am sickened by it all. I know someone has invented the apology so that the vast fraudsters are never punished. They just simply say sorry. But I think the mud pie experts have got an awful lot to be sorry about. These people belong in court, exposed, humiliated and sent down. I hope Britain at least will try to uphold the laws on stealing and culpability, because it is time accountability was measured out and, if it were, we should be looking to the senior staff in the Labour Party for wrecking our economy by this and other means, and for the failure of many Conservative leaders to put the matter right. Don't imagine these thieves don't know what they are doing. They are relying on a docile peasant community to keep its head down. There are plenty of problems in energy, but despite them all, we have to open the coal mines and get rid of lies and bad science. Then there will be a way forward. There always is, even at the 11th hour, but we have reached that moment when climate ministers need to be told to convene a scientists' meeting of real scientists, that is, to discover their stupidity and true mission, for there is treason against democracy and its people.